3 years earlier, John White had sailed away from a small island off the coast of what would one day be North Carolina, just for a short while, to get supplies. He left more than 100 people behind. Among them were his own daughter and his newborn granddaughter. Now the once promising fort was overgrown and silent. No bodies, no signs of a fight, not a single living soul, and only one rough word carved into the trunk of a tree: CRO. What happened to this settlement on the island of Croatoan? Why did the colony disappear as if it had never existed at all? Flash of firelight, in half darkness, the face of an old Indian. Old Indian quietly says,
"Come closer to the fire. You're about to hear how it really happened. I'll tell you the tangled story of the very first English settlement in our lands, how they quickly managed to befriend the local tribes, and just as quickly lose their trust. What they did here, and why this mystery is not exactly what it looks like from your side of the ocean. First, before the word on the tree, in 1584, Queen Elizabeth I granted Walter Raleigh a patent to establish English claims in America. The idea was simple: get there before Spain locked down the entire Atlantic coast. A foothold on that shoreline meant a base for striking Spanish ships and showing English power far from Europe. The first scouting expedition, led by Philip Amadas and Arthur Barlow, reached the Barrier Islands off what is now the coast of North Carolina. They sailed into Pamlico Sound and landed on Roanoke Island, a narrow strip of sand and forest between the open ocean and the mainland. There, English sailors met two key tribes, the Roanoke and the Croatoan. Among them were two men whose choices would echo through this whole story: Manteo of the Croatoan people and Wanchese of the Roanoke. Both agreed to cross the ocean, see England with their own eyes, and return as interpreters standing between two worlds. The scouts went back to London with stories of Virginia: fertile land, sheltered inlets, coastal chiefs willing to talk and trade. On paper, Roanoke looked like a neat solution. Far enough from the main Spanish routes, close enough to native villages to draw food and support from them. We saw the first English sails like pale wings on the edge of the water. They came with metal that didn't break, with cloth that didn't look like ours, and with the smiles of people who needed allies. Our people still thought the real danger was coming from the south, with the Spanish ships. So when these new strangers reached out their hands, some of our chiefs took them as useful partners. For a while, that seemed like the smart move. In 1585, under Sir Richard Grenville, a larger English expedition reached Roanoke, and about 100 men stayed on the island under the command of Ralph Lane. This was not a town. It was an advanced outpost. They built a fort, mounted cannons, and stared south toward the Spanish sea lanes, imagining captured treasure ships and plunder from Spanish cargoes. On the mainland, the Croatoan, under their chief Wingina, controlled a chain of villages, including the large settlement of Dassamongapuk. For the first months, relations between the English, the Croatoan, the Roanoke, and the Croatoan were mutually beneficial. Gifts, joint hunts, help with food. Then the English colony was left without reliable resupply. One ship ran aground in the shoals, logistics fell apart, and no additional vessels came. Lane's men quickly realized their own stores would not last. They became heavily dependent on native supplies of maize and fish. Every English request for food hit local reserves. With each winter, it became harder. More foreign mouths to feed, fewer guarantees that ships from England would ever return. As hunger grew, so did the tension. Lane convinced himself that Wingina was building an alliance against the English, planning to cut off supplies and wipe out the fort. Whether that plan truly existed or not, Lane could no longer be talked down. In his mind, the only solution left was to strike first. In June 1586, he moved to action. English soldiers crossed to the mainland and attacked Dasamongepuk. Wingina was killed, and his severed head was taken as a trophy. After that, any chance of a stable alliance with most coastal peoples was gone. The English stopped being strangers with gifts. They became enemies. Soon after, a storm-battered fleet under Francis Drake appeared off the coast. Damaged ships, dwindling supplies, and hostile neighbours together convinced Lane to abandon the colony. The first Roanoke settlement sailed back to England. Grenville arrived later with reinforcements, found only an empty fort, and, to formally hold the land, left a small garrison of about 15 men on the island. Nothing certain is known about their fate. Most likely there was a small clash between that garrison and the locals, and no one in England stayed alive to write it down. After Lane, Raleigh did not give up on the idea of a settlement. The next attempt was meant to look more thought out and civilian. About 115 settlers, artisans, townspeople, women and children. On paper, their goal was not Roanoke itself, but a new site closer to the Chesapeake Bay, the planned city of Raleigh, considered better for farming and trade. John White, an artist and cartographer who already knew the region, was appointed governor. Among the passengers were his pregnant daughter Eleanor and her husband. To reach the new site, they still had to pass through the Roanoke area, but the colony never made it to Chesapeake. To reach the new site, they still had to pass through the Roanoke area, but the colony never made it to Chesapeake. The simple fact is, over 100 civilians ended up on the same island where a year earlier English soldiers had already tried to dig in. They found Lane's camp empty and partly ruined. From Grenville's garrison there was nothing left but hints. Amid the debris they found bones, probably one of the 15 men left behind. With no ready alternative, White ordered the settlers to restore the fortifications and build houses on the old site. On August 18th, 1587, his daughter gave birth to a girl. Virginia Dare, considered the first English child born in North America. The colony now had women, children, infants, people who could not defend themselves, which made the need for a stable food supply even more critical. Supplies were shrinking fast. Relations with many mainland tribes remained tense, but Manteo and the Croatoan people kept their alliance with the English and shared part of their own stores to help them. By late 1587, White faced a hard choice: stay and watch the settlement slowly starve, or return to England and fight for ships, people and provisions. When the governor sailed back to his country, the island felt different. There were no longer just warriors there. There were women, children, a baby whose cry the night wind carried across the water. Our elders said you could see it on the English faces. They were hungry, even when they tried to hide it. It was obvious. They needed fish, corn, anything to eat. They needed time, but they didn't have it. They hadn't arrived in a season when you can grow much. At first, at night, we still heard their voices around their own fires. Then the sounds came less often. And then, one winter, the wind from that island carried nothing at all. I'll leave my story at that for now. I'll leave you a little in suspense, letting you guess what might have happened next. For now, the old Indian has to go. I'll be back very soon.